It is now time to, a microphone. It is now time to hand over the teams to the Michaelmas team, next term's team. So first, we have Paige, who is unfortunately in hospital at the moment, so is being replaced by Ruth. And she will be replaced in the role of ENTS officer by Penny Jones. Penny. Secondly, we have Leila Gamistis, who will be being replaced in the role of treasurer by James Antell. James. And thirdly, we have Matteo Vianello, who will be being replaced in the role of speaker's officer by Annabelle Van Dalen. Matteo. We have Miss Kate Dunbar, who is the executive officer and who will be being replaced in that role by Daniel Shushena. Daniel. And in a return for Leila, we have William Fitzalan Howard, who has been our vice president for the last year. He will be being replaced by Leila, but before he is, I would like to stress that William has done more for this building than pretty much anyone I can think of, and has been just truly the most wonderful friend that I could have ever asked for, and has served everyone who's worked here for the last year so exceptionally well. And I would like if everyone gave a round of applause for William. And finally, in Michaelmas term, I will be being replaced as president by Miss Asia Lambert, who will, I'm sure, do such a wonderful job, and you will all forget about me instantly the minute she sits on this chair. Asia, you will be fantastic. Good luck, my love.
Right. So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's debate. I'm glad you've made the start of your May week here. I finished my exams earlier, so I'm particularly looking forward to it tonight. So tonight we will be debating "This House believes the Labour Party is over and it's time to go home." So during the 2015 election campaign, Labour was criticised for not having a clear vision for the country. And now, under Jeremy Corbyn, its direction has swung rapidly to the left, embracing positions not seen in the mainstream of British politics for decades. So tonight we ask whether the Labour Party has lost its way, if it's returned to its true principles, or if it is in fact on a journey to renew the tired ground of the centre-left. If you're joining us on live stream tonight, then please use tonight's hashtag, which is CUSLabour. Remember to tweet at Cambridge Union with your comments or questions, and we can try and read some of them out for you tonight. And just a quick thanks from me. It is the end of Charlotte's reign here, and she's been absolutely fantastic, and it's the beginning of mine. I've got massive shoes to try and fill, so thank you very much to you and your team for everything you've done from all of us here. Right, the start of the debate. The first speaker on proposition tonight is Toby Young, who's a British journalist and the author of How to Lose Friends and Alienate People. He famously wrote an article in the Telegraph urging Conservatives to vote for Jeremy Corbyn as Labour leader. Toby.
So even though I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Tory, I was going to make a fairly practical argument, I think, as to why I think it's unlikely that the Labour Party will be revived under Jeremy Corbyn or any time soon. So historically, the Labour Party has been a coalition between two distinct groups, university-educated, middle-class liberals with a small l, and the industrial working class. And I'm going to argue that these two groups have drifted so far apart that the survival of the Labour Party seems at best precarious. So in terms of values, these two groups are quite far apart and have been for some time. Middle-class, small L liberals believe in individual rights and multiculturalism. They're well-educated, people like you, highly mobile, pro-diversity, pro-immigration, soft on crime, defence, security, green on the environment, ambivalent about globalization, but have generally benefited from it or stand to benefit from it, internationalist in outlook, don't feel any greater sense of affinity with someone from Morecambe Bay than they do with someone from Mumbai, and by and large, they're pro-Remain. Working class communitarians, collectivist view of rights and place great stress on community, worry about welfare-free riders and feel a strong sense of attachment both to their local area and to their country, skeptical about the benefits of mass immigration, hawkish on crime, security and defence, not very green, dislike globalization and haven't benefited from it economically or culturally. So those are the two groups, and of course they're by and large pro-Leave. Those are the two groups that Labour has traditionally been comprised of. Whilst Labour has done a pretty good job of retaining the allegiance of the first of those two groups, it's done a very poor job of retaining the allegiance of the second. And really, one of the big political stories in British politics since the Second World War has been the collapse of Labour's working class support. If you compare the 1997 and 2005 general election results, Labour lost some 4 million votes, most of them working class. Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters blame this decline on Tony Blair, but actually the erosion of Labour's working class base predates the New Labour project. In 1966, 69% of manual workers gave their vote to Labour, but by 1987, long before Blair, it was only 45%. And the greatest desertion of Labour in the post-war period has been amongst skilled manual workers, where support's fallen from around 60% in the 1940s and 1950s to around 34% by the end of the 80s. The Corbynistas are fond of describing New Labour as a middle-class takeover of the party, but in terms of support, the party actually attracted more working-class support in 97 than it had done in several of the previous general elections. It won back, Tony Blair's Labour won back many working-class voters who deserted the party, thanks in part to the hardening of the party line under Blair on crime, defence and security, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, and of course Blair taking every opportunity to wrap himself in the flag. And it's true that Labour lost a good deal of its popularity under Blair's premiership, but it didn't win back its working-class supporters when he handed the reins to Gordon Brown or when Miliband took over from Brown. So if you compare the 2005 and 2015 election results and break it down according to the NRS classification scale, A, B, C1, C2, etc., Labour didn't succeed in increasing its working class support in 2015. So amongst AB voters, middle class voters and above, support barely changed between 2005 and 2015. 28% in 2005, 27% in 2015. Among C2 voters, support for Labour declined. Sorry, among C1 voters, it remained broadly the same too, but amongst C2 voters, the lower you go down the classification scale, the more Labour's support eroded between 2005 and 2015. So amongst C2 voters, support for Labour declined from 40% in 2005 to 30% in 2015, and amongst DE voters from 48% in 2005 to 37% in 2015. So where have they gone, these working class voters? Well, some have gone to the Tories, and that particularly happened under Margaret Thatcher, came back in 97, but then drifted off again to the Tories, but increasingly they're drifting to UKIP. Overall, Labour only lost 5% of 2010 Labour voters to UKIP in 2015, but that figure was much higher in marginal Labour Conservative seats, which is one of the reasons the Conservatives won an unexpected overall majority at the last election. So in Plymouth Moor View, for instance, where the Conservatives won the seat from Labour in 2015, UKIP increased its vote from 8% in 2010 to 22% in 2015. And it's likely that a lot of those voters were Labour voters in 2010. John Cruddas, the Labour MP tasked with carrying out a post-mortem of Labour's defeat, calculated that if every UKIP voter in 2015 had voted Labour, Labour would have won 63 more seats. And if only 20% of them had voted Labour in Conservative Labour marginals. That is to say, if only 20% of the people who voted UKIP in 2015 had voted Labour instead in 2015, then Labour would have won an additional 13 seats in Conservative Labour marginals. Well, can Corbyn stop this drift? Is it likely to be arrested under him? Well, the Corbynistas often point to a surge in Labour's party membership, both in the run-up to his electoral victory last year and since then. They attribute this surge in the party's popularity to his rejection of the shibboleths of New Labour. And the number of members almost doubled in size, from around 193,000 to over 388,000 in 1 year under Corbyn. But his appeal is, I'm afraid, largely to middle-class Liberals and not to Labour's traditional working-class voters. So according to some internal party data leaked to The Guardian in January of this year, many of Labour's new members are, quote, high-status city dwellers living in central locations and pursuing careers with high rewards. And as a proportion of the UK's population, this demographic constitutes 4%. And few of the new members, the people who've joined, who've been electrified by Corbyn's victory since last year, are made up of the over 50s, or people from rural areas, or people struggling to make ends meet, which are the people that Labour needs to win back if it's going to win at the next election. And it seems unlikely, to put it mildly, that Corbyn's politics are going to win back these traditional working-class voters who've deserted Labour for the Tories and UKIP. And I'm thinking in particular of Corbyn's failure to sing the national anthem during the Battle of Britain memorial service last year, his stated desire to reach a, quote, reasonable accommodation, unquote, with Argentina over the Falklands, his opposition to Britain's independent nuclear deterrent, his history of being soft on terrorism, whether it's inviting Sinn Féin to tea at the House of Commons about a week after the Brighton bomb, describing Hamas and Hezbollah as his friends, or suggesting we should open a dialogue with ISIS and seek to understand their, quote, strong points, unquote. So his suggestion in the not-too-distant past that we should abolish the army, disband our security services and disarm the police, and the fact that he's pro-EU, at least he's pro-EU since he became Labour leader last year, and pro-immigration. None of these policy positions, none of this behaviour is likely to endear Labour to traditional working-class voters. Corbyn actually seems like exactly the kind of Labour Party member that George Orwell despaired of in The Road to Wigging Pier when he wrote, "One sometimes gets the impression that the mere words socialism and communism draw towards them with magnetic force every fruit juice drinker, nudist, sandal wearer, sex maniac, Quaker, nature cure quack, and pacifist in England." Corbyn seems to fit that mould. His supporters have again and again shown their unwillingness to make any accommodation with electoral reality. And indeed, that's a point of pride for the Corbynistas. One of the key differences between them and the detested Blairites, their unwillingness to give up their socialist principles in order to win votes. But the fact that they prize doctrinal purity over winning elections suggests that they're not best placed to win back these white, for the most part, working-class supporters who don't share many of their policy positions. The Financial Times columnist, Janan Ganache, said of Corbyn's followers among the metropolitan elite, the kind of people who've joined the Labour Party since Corbyn won, he said, quote, "A Corbyn rally is not a band of desperate workers fighting to improve their circumstances. It is a communion of comfortable people working their way up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They have physical health and security. They now crave belonging and self-actualization. They're in politics for the dopamine squirt that comes with total belief and immersion in like-minded company." One of John Cruddas' findings in the 2015 post-election post-mortem was that Labour wasn't trusted on the economy. And after Corbyn, it seems unlikely it'll be trusted on defence and security either. The last time Labour went into a general election with a policy of unilateral disarmament was under Michael Foot in 1983, with what Peter Shaw described. He described its manifesto as the longest suicide note in history. And sure enough, the party polled a lower share of the popular vote in '83 when it campaigned for nuclear disarmament, unilateral nuclear disarmament, than it did at any time since 1918. Some of Corbyn's supporters, I'm almost finished, will point to the success of Syriza and Podemos in Greece, or the likely success of Podemos in the forthcoming Spanish elections as evidence that parties like the Corbyn Labour Party can win popular support. But both Spain and Greece were brutalized by the euro crisis and have suffered remedial austerity measures imposed on them by the Troika, the European Central Bank, the IMF, and the European Commission. Youth unemployment in Spain is 45.3%, and in Greece it's 48.9%. In the UK, at present, it's 13.7%. So the conditions in Spain and Greece are very different. Since 1906, Labour's had 25 leaders, including Corbyn, and only 3 have won overall parliamentary majorities. And I tried to work this out over the dinner, and in spite of the one I think I've got it right, that means that each leader has a 12.5% chance of winning a general election and an 87.5% chance of losing. The 3 winners were Clement Attlee, Harold Wilson, and Tony Blair, as I'm sure you know. It seems unlikely, to put it mildly, that Corbyn is going to overturn those odds and become the 4th leader in the Labour Party's history to win an overall majority at the next general election. And I think, given the unlikeliness of him reassembling the historic coalition between middle-class liberal intellectuals and working-class communitarian supporters, given the continuing drift away from the party of that industrial working-class base, it seems very unlikely that Corbyn will win, and in all likelihood, I think, the Labour Party will collapse and reform in some new shape. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Toby. Now we turn to the opposition, and opening the opposition this evening is Charlotte Ivers, who's a third-year History and Philosophy Sciences student at Pembroke and the union's president for Easter 2016. She is hoping to still be on the same side of this debate by June. So, thank you, Charlotte.
I've gone for a little visual champagne socialism joke here, partly because my speech was quite hurriedly written, and partly because everyone keeps saying I'm going to have a career in politics, and I thought if there's one way to end that right here, right now, it was a photo of me with this. So, ladies and gentlemen, it used to be the case in this union that when a president reached their final debate, he, and it would be a he, would be forced to defend a position that was completely indefensible. Every time I've opened a newspaper for the last 6 months, I have felt one step closer to renewing by accident this ancient tradition. I hope tonight that I will be able to persuade you that this is not the case. The Labour Party, in its present form, bears a startling resemblance to the dress that I am currently wearing. It is ostentatiously red. It has very little substance. And if things go wrong, there is a worrying likelihood that we will all be exposed to a pair of tits. We have a government that is swinging wildly to the right, unchecked by any legitimate opposition. It flounders between U-turn and U-turn, and it is bitterly divided over Europe, and yet it is still leading in the polls. As I said, this seems like an unjustifiable position to defend the idea that the Labour Party should continue. And yet, I have spent 3 years here as a philosophy student, a debater, and a student journalist. If there's one thing that's taught me, it is that you can defend an undefendable position. But I'm not going to try to do that, partly because this is a presidential speech, and traditionally that's not really what you try and do, and partly because I have very few facts, very little evidence, and even fewer arguments to back up my case. I feel like I have this in common with our friend, Comrade Corbyn. And what I have in common too with Mr. Corbyn is that I find myself defending a position that I sometimes struggle to believe myself. We see him in the EU referendum standing up, defending a position that we all know he doesn't believe. when he made his launch speech with Stronger In, with massive Stronger In banners right behind him. The most Googled question in the United Kingdom for that hour was, what side of the Brexit debate is Jeremy Corbyn on? He doesn't believe what he's saying. He's not completely principled. He is not this great ideologue that we would like to believe that he is. He will say things to survive. He will say things to get by. He is not as pure as he thinks he is. But there are other ways, too, in which I am like our friend Mr. Corbyn. Both of us were elected to positions nobody would have believed we would have been elected to. Both of us were in charge of institutions that we are barely qualified to run. Both of us achieved this and sustained it only through the enduring support, encouragement, and generosity of spirit of our friends. Both of us are unconditionally loved by my mother, despite increasing evidence that there is absolutely nothing to say for either of us, but still she persists. And finally, and perhaps most thankfully, neither of us are ever going to be Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And yet, here I feel the similarities between the two of us may end. Perhaps the greatest difference comes in the people whom we have found ourselves surrounded by. I have been blessed this term to have been supported by a team who have both unparalleled competence and perhaps, even more importantly, unparalleled kindness. Jeremy Corbyn, meanwhile, has been blessed by the company of John McDonnell. With this in mind, I would like to raise a toast to my whole team. I would like to thank my press officers, Anna and Laura, for not developing an embarrassingly close relationship with Russia Today. I would like to thank my treasurer, Layla, for never explicitly saying that she supports the IRA. Finally, I would like to thank my executive team, Kate, Paige, and Matteo, who have never made a document about how much each individual fresher likes or dislikes me, and if they had made it, they wouldn't have left it in the bar. In all seriousness, it has been an absolute honor to work with such fantastic people. But ladies and gentlemen, perhaps the greatest way in which I differ from Mr. Corbyn, and here I beg your leave to speak seriously for a moment, is that I believe, and have always believed, and I believe always will, that ideological purity means nothing in the face of genuine human suffering. If I believed, as Mr. Corbyn believes, that the Tories literally kill people, then I would stop at nothing to ensure that they faced competent opposition. I would do everything that I could to ensure that they are not still in power come 2020. I would relax my ideology in favor of being able to do just even a little bit of good. If it meant getting one person off the streets, one child back into school, I would, in the words of David Cameron's mother, put on a suit, do up my tie, and sing the bloody national anthem. When you see suffering in the world, it is not enough to sit in one's ivory tower and say, wouldn't it be nice if things were different? Isn't it a shame that these silly little people are so deceived by their silly little newspapers that they cannot see the light? Because when people are suffering, and when people are hungry, and when people are cold, they do not care how many people are lining up to take selfies with you. They do not care if your ideology is pure and perfect. They do not care if you are a different kind of politician. They care that you can be a competent opposition. They care that you can get into power and change things for them and make it better. And I do not believe that I am the only Labour voter who feels this way. The Labour Party is full of good people, honourable people who went into politics because they wanted to make the world better, because the sight of suffering was abhorrent to them, to its very core, and they wanted to see change. And these people, I am sure, will not stand by to see their party destroyed. These people know that Britain needs a Labour Party. They know that they have a duty to those that voted them and those that did not, to provide a viable opposition and to participate seriously in our democracy. You might say, well, why don't you form another party? Perhaps not me, strictly speaking. I'm not sure this is a good idea. The Labour Party gave us the NHS. It gave us the welfare state. It has done more for women's rights than any other party in the United Kingdom. You don't create a history like that overnight. You don't create an identity like that. You don't create an ideology like that. I believe that the Labour Party still has those foundations and that the right people can build on it. I believe that the members of Parliament for the Labour Party would not vote for Jeremy Corbyn to be in another leadership election when the time comes for that leadership election. So we do not need to have the concern that the membership of the Labour Party is so unrepresentative that it will not ever deliver a good leader. Ladies and gentlemen, as the person responsible for the terrible pun in this motion, I feel like I should actually engage with the metaphor to finish my speech. Picture the scene. It is 3 a.m. at your mate Ed's house party. You're not sure what you think about Ed, but he's a nice guy, so you've gone along, you brought a bottle, it's fine. And he's gone to bed, and things seem to be winding down. And then suddenly, your weird friend Jeremy appears with a handful of pills. And he says to you, take these, it'll feel incredible. For just a short amount of time, it'll feel incredible. It'll be the most pure, wonderful thing. You'll feel so good about yourself. But you know, ladies and gentlemen, you know if you take that pill, you will wake up the next morning and you'll feel terrible. And it'll be worse than it ever was before, because you will have nothing left of the fun you had the night before. So I think we should go to bed. And I think some of us would like to take Dan Jarvis to bed with us, but that's for another day. And I think we should sleep on it a bit. And then I think we should wake up in the morning prepared to do the real work to get Labour back into government. Because this country needs a Labour government. It needs a viable opposition at the very least. So, ladies and gentlemen, it has been an extraordinary honour and privilege to be your president this term and hopefully to provide you with entertaining events and with good discussions. As I said before, it's not something I ever thought I would do. It's not something I ever particularly wanted to do up until my 3rd year. And mainly thanks to the people who are here, it has been one of the best things that I have ever done, and it is down to all of you that I've been able to do that. So thank you for supporting this fantastic institution that means a lot to me. I hope tonight you will choose to support another institution that also means a lot to me. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, and I urge you to support this motion.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. So we now move to our first round of floor speeches. We will do these in proposition, opposition, and abstentions, should you so wish. So firstly, would anyone like to make a speech in proposition of the motion? Nobody at all? Okay. Would anyone like to make a speech in opposition of the motion? Yes, here. Have we got a mic on this side at all? If that one's not working. Oh, more mics than you need now.
Thank you. Owen McCardle, St Catherine's College. Now, I voted for Liz Kendall, so I'll leave to your imagination my views on the current state of the Labour Party at a UK level. Hint, hint, I agree with almost everything that Mr Young has said this evening. But it's as someone who's lived in Wales for a decade now that I was completely bemused, dumbstruck, to see this motion on the union term card, and I'll be voting strongly against it. Because 5 weeks ago we saw Welsh Labour win their 5th straight Assembly elections with more than double the number of seats of their nearest rival and a clear mandate to form the new Welsh government. In the face of an increasingly divided opposition, the job of Labour First Minister of Wales is fast becoming a job for life. It's not just the opponents of First Minister Carwyn Jones who are calling him King Carwyn, now the broadcast media are too. Now you could say, and you would be right to say, that jobs for life are not a good thing in a healthy democracy, but let's not forget the sort of reasons that Wales votes Labour every time. An end to prescription charges, an end to hospital car parking charges, no junior doctors strike, a free breakfast every morning for every primary school child. And of course, Welsh students in Cambridge, there aren't many of us, but we pay lower tuition fees here than students from anywhere else, graduating with an average of £18,000 less debt than our counterparts from over the border. Now, yeah, I don't like to rub that one in too much. Now, putting my Kendall supporter hat back on, I could say that that's the result of having a Labour Party, a Welsh Labour Party, with a governing mentality, and that is proudly pro-business. but the Labour Party is over and it's time to go home. Nonsense. Go over Offa's Dyke, because by the banks of the Taff, they are still partying like it's 1997. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much. Would anyone like to make a speech in abstention? No, okay, so if we're quiet on the floor tonight, we'll get back to the main debate. So, our second speaker in proposition of tonight's motion is Zach Hassan, who's a fourth-year student at Jesus College, studying medicine and a regular at the Union. Zach.
Ladies and gentlemen, Madam President, welcome to the chair. It's reluctantly that I stand on this side of the House. I would love to be on that side and singing the praises of the Labour Party and for Labour ideals of social justice, but my job tonight is going to be to explain to you the reasons why I can't do that. Let me just try and draw out what the point of my speech is going to be about by referencing the two speeches before me. Now, Charlotte said that she doesn't like Corbyn because she talked about suffering and social injustice, and that Corbyn's principles don't really reflect that and don't capture that for her. Toby, on the other hand, doesn't like Corbyn or thinks that Corbyn is bad for the Labour Party because they will never get electoral success. Now, whichever one of those things that you agree with, those arguments, what I would like to point out to you is there are different ways of measuring the success of the Labour Party, and that is really the problem that is at the root of this. Because I think Toby said a lot of very accurate things about the different personalities, the different types of people that are in the Labour Party, and how there's friction between them that really cannot be accommodated at the moment. So what do I think the Labour Party is? Why am I not on that side of the House? What's my definition of what it is? Well, I'm going to quote Jimmy Reid, that great titan of trade union politics, in his rectorial speech when he was elected for Glasgow University rector, which was compared to the Gettysburg Address in terms of its impact on the students it had there. The other illustration is the widespread implicit acceptance of the concept and term, the rat race. The picture it conjures up is one where we are scurrying around, scrambling for position, trampling on others, backstabbing, all in pursuit of personal success. To the students, I address this appeal. Reject these attitudes. Reject the values and false morality that underlie these attitudes. A rat race is for rats. We're not rats, we're people. Reject the insidious pressures in society that would blunt your critical faculties to all that is happening around you, that would caution silence in the face of injustice, lest you jeopardize your chances of self-promotion and self-advancement. This is how it starts. And before you know where you are a fully paid up member of the Rat Pack. Now, I say to you, ladies and gentlemen, that this is exactly what's happened to the Labour Party. They are in a conflict between their principles and electoral success, and that this is the reason why they cannot hope to accommodate all of these different beliefs. So that's what I think the Labour Party is about. Why do I think that the Labour Party is not meeting those things? Well, two reasons. Principles. I think they've abandoned their principles. I think that there's much evidence, which I will talk about, that shows that this conflict has led to the abandonment of Labour principles. And secondly, it's about identity. And I think that Toby has already captured a lot about what I want to say about that. There are too many identities in the Labour Party, all of which can't be captured by the ideology that it has. So let's talk about principles. So, I have lots of pieces of paper. Okay, here we go. So, state-supplied free labour, does that sound like a Labour principle? Well, it was Labour that introduced workfare programmes under New Labour. Kate Riley won an appeal in the Court of Appeal after a workfare programme told her that her benefits would be cut if she refused to take a job for zero money, zero pay. This is something which is happening to a lot of people. And it's a Labour initiative continued under the Conservatives. Benefit sanctions, because we hear a lot about Ian Duncan Smith being criticised for the Fit to Work assessment and the untold damage that has had on disabled people and people who are not really able to work. And it's also been linked to an increase in suicides. It started with the work capability assessment, which was introduced under Labour, which reduced the ability of people to have access to in-work benefits, which tried to tighten up the welfare state so that it wouldn't help the people that it's designed to help. It's an amazing social crime, in my opinion. Now, Blunkett advocated putting the welfare state, parts of it, into corporate hands. Hands like the company A4E, which was plagued with scandal after scandal for siphoning away taxpayer money from where it should have been going on welfare and helping people to get into work, into private profit. Now, these things are not traditionally Labour principles, but they're things that the Labour Party has been doing. Now, I put it to you that places where Labour principles should be the most popular, places such as where I'm from, Scotland, or in the north of England, where Toby rightly talks about the working class person who's not really captured by the Labour Party at the moment. Now, I put to you a different proposition. What if they're sceptical about the Labour Party's principles and their ability to deliver on those things? Now, I think that's the reason why Scotland voted entirely for the SNP in the general election, not independents. And I think it's the reason that Labour's popularity is so under such attack at the moment. Austerity as well. The price for bank bailouts has been for the government to take on that debt and in turn to pass it on to citizens and households. Household debt is now the highest that it has been for quite some time. At the same time, it's socialism for the rich, state money for private companies to take over parts of the welfare state, to restructure debts within the financial centre. Now, I think that that's an abandonment of a Labour principle. Now, we can't talk about principles without talking about Corbyn. And Corbyn's somebody who I would like to have a lot of affinity with. But I don't think he can command his own party. I think they're too split. Sadiq Khan's election strategy, when he won the London mayor election, was to feature numerous attempts to distance himself from what Corbyn was saying. He said, "I won't be anyone's patsy, whether it's David Cameron or Corbyn. Labour must be more than a protest party." He's distanced himself from numerous of Corbyn's positions, notably on the EU. Now, that can't be a good place for a Labour Party to stand. If its own members are distancing itself from the leadership, that's got to be a sign that something is breaking apart. The Investigatory Powers Bill, the Snoopers Charter. Now, this should be a classically Labour position to say, no, that's wrong. We stand for civil liberties. We stand against the power of the state, acting against individual citizens when the legal powers and the opportunity for civil rights to be violated, is there. But Labour backed it. Only the SNP, the Lib Dems and Plaid Cymru, and a handful of other MPs actually voted against it. Now, if we've got a situation where Labour and the Tories are voting together, now that's not opposition, that's collusion. And I put it to you that the reason that Labour is in trouble right now, because it's colluding with the opposition, it's colluding with the people that it should be arguing against. This must be why it's losing support. Yeah, no problem.
So is your argument that the opposition must never vote with the government, no matter what they're proposing, how good it is? They always have to oppose to live up to the title of opposition?
No, you're absolutely right to say that. No, it shouldn't be for the opposition shouldn't vote down everything that the government tries to do. That's obviously ludicrous. Now, but what they shouldn't do is to violate their own principles, voting for a piece of legislation which pretty much, has been panned in the press for being a bad piece of legislation. It's traditionally not what a Labour Party would be doing. Now, so somebody like me looks at that and says, I don't want to vote for that. Now, again, that's something that's not just happening with me, it's happening with lots of people in Scotland. I bet it's happening with lots of people in the north of England too, and I'm sure it's happening with lots of people in Wales as well. Let's talk about identity now. So, even if you don't buy into my left-wing analysis, which I understand might be, the case with many people here, the Labour Party as we know it is now over. It's trying to capture too many identities, appeal to too many types of new voter, and through no fault of its own, is worse placed to understand these new identities. I would add one to the two that Toby gave. Now, I think that there's an appetite for a left social democracy that is both globalist and outward-looking, Europeanist. Now, that's happening in Scotland now. I think it could continue to happen in places in the north of England. And on the topic of migration, I think that it's the fault of the Labour Party has not been to a failure to sort of capture, to pander to these sort of xenophobic views about migration, but it's actually a failure to make the argument that immigration is beneficial to us all, and that people pay in more than they take out in terms of migration. That the real problems when people cite migration is actually about a failure to provide public services. Something which actually should make Corbyn's argument stronger. So, in conclusion, Labour needs to be better than what it is now. Its voters are abandoning it. Divided loyalties within it prevent the party from inspiring new voters and to recapture ones that have left them. Now, I think what Labour would need to do in order for me to be on that side of the house is to go out and stick to its principles and not be frightened of where it might take them. I think they might find that it actually endears people to them. So I beg you to propose this motion.
Thank you very much, Zach. Now, our next speaker on opposition this evening is Benjamin Kentish, who's a former president of the Cambridge Union and is the parliamentary assistant to David Lammy MP. Ben, thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Touched a nerve.
Thank you, Madam President. It's great to be back in Cambridge, in this building, in this chamber, a room that has hosted the likes of Ronald Reagan, Winston Churchill, the Dalai Lama, and Lembit Opik. I'm not sure many of you have seen that great man speak. I suspect even fewer of you have seen him in Lola Low until closing time. Now, Asia, congratulations on your first debate, and Charlotte, congratulations on a brilliant term and a brilliant speech. It's a hard act to follow. But before I do start, I just wanted to address a point that Toby made, because Toby's speech seemed to suggest that because Labour is divided or isn't completely united, it's not fit to govern. And I thought that argument made without any irony as Tory government ministers tear each other apart in the media just needed to be picked up on. But I want to start my speech, ladies and gentlemen, with 5 facts. 1. Where are they? 1. In the 20th century, Labour governed for just 23 of 100 years. This century, it's already governed for 10. 2. Just over a month ago, London elected its first Labour mayor in 8 years. Bristol did the same. 3. In the latest YouGov poll, the Tories and Labour are neck and neck, both tied on 33%. 4, and Toby mentioned this, the number of Labour members has almost doubled in 1 year alone, up by 200,000 to the highest level in 20 years. And 5, This might surprise some of you, but Jeremy Corbyn's approval ratings are now higher than those of David Cameron's. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam President, these are not the signs of a party in its death throes. Parties that are dead do not attract thousands of new members, see their poll ratings improve or their candidates elected. They don't have leaders who are more popular than the Prime Minister. They've not recently spent 13 years in government. Now, that's not to say that everything's perfect in the Labour Party, because clearly it isn't. We lost 2 elections comprehensively. We're not yet doing enough to win people back in Scotland, and we're not doing enough to convince voters in England. The media is dominated day after day, it seems, by stories of infighting and bickering, criticisms and complaints. If we're honest, that is the reality. But it's wrong, it's deeply wrong to say that this is it for the Labour Party, that it's finished. It discounts completely the ups and downs of politics, the comings and goings of power, the changing of the tides of public opinion. It takes the facts of one 6-year period and turns them into an inevitability about the next 60 or even 600. The truth is, ladies and gentlemen, that all parties have bad spells. Even the best may bawl. There's still that strange time between 11 and 1 a.m. when no one quite knows what to do, the food's all run out, and the decent music hasn't started yet. Now, Madam President, I want to talk a bit about the past, because we can't pretend Labour hasn't been here before. We cannot pretend that this is anything new. As Toby said, again, in 1983, the party was massacred at the ballot box, won 24 fewer seats than it did last time round, and the manifesto was dubbed the longest suicide note in history. Rejected comprehensively by the public, riddled with internal divisions, unsure of its future, uncertain of its prospects, unconvinced it would ever govern again. And there were those, just like tonight, and those on the proposition, who said that was it. No more Labour as a credible party. Game over, dead, buried, irrelevant. It's the same argument that you'll hear tonight. But Madam President, we've heard it all before. But you know what? For a while they were right. In 1988, we lost again. In 1992, it happened too. But here's the thing. Look what happened next. 18 long years later, on a crisp sunny morning in 1997, Tony Blair walks through the door of number 10 to begin 13 successful years of a Labour government. A government that made record investment in the NHS, brought peace to Northern Ireland, introduced civil partnerships, paternity pay, maternity leave, the minimum wage, record school results, more university students than ever before, devolution, Sure Start, crime down by a third, and 500,000 children out of poverty. And who in 1992, or 1988, or 1983 saw that? Who, during the despair of those defeats, said that just one election later, Labour would win a landslide victory? But that is what it did, and that, this side of the House will argue, it will do again. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on the past because Charlotte's touched on it already, but this motion has another part to it, that it's time to go home. What does that mean? Now, clearly it's a pun. But it's also more than that. The suggestion is, it seems, that it's time to pack it up and give it in, to throw in the towel, go home and put up our feet. So to win tonight, the proposition needs to convince you not just that Labour is in a tough patch, not just, as Toby said, even that it's disunited, not just that it may lose the next election, or even the one after that. To win this debate, they have to prove to you all that it's not even worth fighting for, that the time has come, after 116 years, to pack it in, to give up the Labour Party and let the Tories get on with it. Yeah.
I mean, what you've kind of said is that, well, the only thing we can do if we want a Labour government is sit down and wait for the next Blair to come along. Do you think there's any wonder that when you're saying things like that, people in Scotland are calling the Labour Party the Red Tories?
I'll get to that. But no, the point, I'm coming to that. The point is that this is a temporary period, and your argument seems to be, the motion is the Labour Party is over. Not it's over for the next 2 years or the 5 years, but it's it. And I think you've both failed to make that case tonight. But it's strange, really, that you should argue, guys, that the Labour Party is not worth giving up on, that is worth giving up on. Because on other issues, you're not so defeatist. Lord Bilimoria, talking about Europe, this is, because in 2 weeks' time today, we'll go to the polls, said, we need to stay together in the EU and help it reform from the inside. Well, yes, quite. They tell us we should remain in Europe because you can't change anything if you give up and leave. Stay inside and fight, they say. But when it comes to the Labour Party, why do they set such a different standard? There's no point, they say. Give up. Instead of trying to do with the Labour Party what they happily urge others to do with the EU, they say, chuck in the towel. Where is the consistency in that? But more importantly, where is the fight? So no, it's not time to go home. If you don't like the current state of the party, if you're tempted to support it, don't stand there and criticise, get involved. Change the direction if you don't like the leadership. Don't just quit when you don't agree. Make the case for why it's wrong and offer the alternative. So tonight, ladies and gentlemen, you have a choice. You can join the proposition, throw up your hands and turn away. Or you can accept that yes, things are bad, that those 2 tough election defeats are fresh in the mind, that divisions and discord dominate the headlines, but that Labour is far from done. And I want to consider for a minute that it's true, that Labour is over and that only the Tories remain, destined for eternal government. And Charlotte touched on this point. But let's just look at what that means. Now, without being too serious, it means 50%. That's the increase since 2010 in the number of people sleeping rough in England. It means 1,109,309. That's the number of people forced to rely on food banks, a rise of 2,600 since David Cameron became Prime Minister. 2,380, the number of people who have died after being declared fit to work and had their benefits taken away. And 3,000, the number of unaccompanied child refugees this government has refused to give help to. Are we really saying that this is it? That this is as good as it gets? That there's no longer any viable alternative? Because think carefully about what voting for this motion really means. It means that is the kind of country we must now accept. Or do we say that yes, the Labour Party is in a tricky place, but that there is hope that there is something better than the status quo? Because the truth is, Madam President, one election does not make a political party, nor even do 2 or 3. Even the Liberal Democrats, yes, them, crushed rightly by the electorate at the last election, will, I'm afraid to say, one day make a comeback. If a week is a long time in politics, then 5 or 10 years is a lifetime. So Labour isn't over, far from it. Those core principles that have driven the party for over a century, a commitment to a fairer society, a more equal one, to tolerance and justice, and an overriding commitment to making Britain better for the majority. Leaders come and go, members change, even MPs split in and out, but fundamentally those values are what endures, and they endure today. So how, then, can the Labour Party be over? But what's even more important, as I conclude, is that the British people still share those values. 61% support raising the minimum wage. 58% want more nationalisation. 50% would pay more tax to fund the NHS. And more than half want the top rate of tax raised to 60p. And I want to say this, the voters of tomorrow, younger people, will not vote for a Conservative party that has so blatantly targeted them. A party that's raised tuition fees while abolishing EMA and careers advice for young people. A party that has taken benefits away from the young and excluded under 25s from the new minimum wage at the same time as protecting benefits for the elderly and cutting tax on pensions. As a Tory support base gets older, so it gets smaller, and it's Labour that will benefit. The Labour Party does not die because of one leader or one election or 2. It dies only when those who believe in it, who rely on it, lose all hope. That time has not yet come. The proposition haven't convinced us that it has, and I'd argue it's not even close. The Labour Party isn't over. It's not time to go home. It's time to get a grip, start fighting back, put your faith in the only major party that stands up for our generation, and vote against this motion tonight.
Thank you very much, Ben. Right, now I would like to move to another round of floor speeches if possible, so I'm hoping people might feel slightly more talkative by this point. So did anyone like to give a speech in proposition of the motion at all? One upstairs. Can we get a mic? Oh, that's an ambitious run maybe going on there. Oh, unfortunately, he's now running for no entire reason as well. Lovely. Right. Thank you, though. Yes, is that a speech in opposition? Fantastic. Right, we have a keen man at the back. Someone could pass him a mic. Ah, lovely.
Congratulate Charlotte, first of all, on a wonderful speech. So much better than my own presidential speech when I stood in her shoes. Well, not those shoes, or indeed that dress. It was hard for me. I was proposing the motion that marriage is not an outmoded institution, and my wife was speaking against me. I came to another presidential debate a few years ago on the motion that this House would disband the Liberal Democrats. Well, as a Liberal Democrat, I wasn't having that, and we did defeat it. And I quoted our Constitution, which says that no one should be oppressed by poverty, ignorance, or conformity. And if you send the Labour Party home and you disband the Liberal Democrats, that's what you'll have: poverty, ignorance, and conformity. And on the 23rd of June, the most important vote of our lives, some of you may have seen the ballot paper. It's been on the internet. And it says, you've got the two boxes. And the first box says, vote to stay in the European Union. And the second box says, vote to be governed by a bunch of psycho nut jobs. And that's what you get if you disband the Liberal Democrats and you send the Labour Party home. Defeat the motion.
Any speeches in abstention at all tonight? Lovely, one there. If we can get a microphone over, please. It's
I'm Colin from Magdalen. I just wanted to make a direct reply to your point about the Liberal Party, sir. I disagree with Karl Marx. History doesn't repeat itself. I'm an historian. Yes, that happened with the Liberal Party, but in the 1980s, the Gang of Four was created. The Gang of Four tried to create the Social Democrat Party for the exact same reason that's happening now, and, well, that just prolonged Thatcher's rule. So I think we should avoid using analogies like that. What's happening now is only happening now. We shouldn't just point to the Liberal Party or point to the Social Democrats. We should realize that it's a unique situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And since there's a last chance for speeches, I'll just do one quick round as well, just in case there are any more in the speech and proposition.
I kind of agree that the Labour Party is in crisis, but the issue which I'm having with both sides is the direction it needs to take in order to correct itself. On the one hand, you two seem to be saying that there needs to be a move back towards Blairite politics. I think that's something I would personally agree with, but I believe with the current, the upcoming Chilcot inquiry, I think that will see a very strong response against that form of politics and a serious, even more damage to the Blair brand, which will make it very difficult for the Labour Party to move back to the right. And, you know, on the left, you also now have a crisis with anti-Semitism as well, which makes it, really impossible, I believe, for popular support for the Labour Party to increase if it was to move even further in Corbyn's direction. So whether it's a case of going home, I don't know, but I struggle to see a direction that the Labour Party can now take in order to seriously challenge in 2020 at least.
Thank you very much. Did you want to reply? Yep. Oh, no, absolutely.
Yeah, reply to that. When you get the answer about which direction we should take, I think you should tell Corbyn, because I think we all want the answer to that.
Thanks very much, Zach. Have we got any more speeches in opposition at all? From the floor. Yes, from the row there. Oh, in proposition? Why not? It's the end of the term.
Thank you. I'm Chris from Clare. It seemed to me that the crux of the answer to this was really in Toby's speech at the start. As you said, we've had 3 Labour Prime Ministers. Each one had a bold economic vision. With Attlee, we had a welfare state. With Wilson, we forget it now, we had planning. With Blair, we had someone who believed, or perhaps successfully for a while, depending on what you believe about the crash, that you could have a high revenue economy and redistribute it effectively. What do you have now? You have a rump of centre-right Labour MPs who unfortunately get labelled Tory light, and on the other hand, you have a Corbyn vision of the Labour Party, which seems to me to revolve around an abhorrence of power. So unfortunately, Labour, although its values have always been noble and are always relevant, values have never been enough to win an election by themselves in British politics. And unless it can come out with some new imaginative economic vision, bearing in mind that the Blairite model has been utterly discredited by the crash, it seems to me that it hasn't just slipped to sleep, it's gone into a coma.
Right. Okey-doke. Well, we better get back to the main debate then. So on to our final speaker in proposition for the evening. We turn to Lord Bilimoria, who is a crossbench peer. He was vice president of the union here in 1988 before founding and chairing the Cobra Beer Partnership, and he's also the Chancellor of the University of Birmingham. Lord Bilimoria. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, and congratulations to you. And congratulations to you as well, Charlotte, and very well done in your term and in your speech. Standing here at this dispatch box brings back many, many memories. In fact, right opposite me, when I had the privilege for 2 years running, leading the Cambridge Union debating team against the Oxford Union, and for both those years they were here in this chamber, my opponent standing there was the one and only Michael Gove. Little did I know, this man, my friend, would be responsible for the destruction of his own party. Little did I know that he would be a sidekick to this country's court jester, Boris Johnson. This is what happens when you become president of the Oxford Union. You are groomed. You are groomed to destroy parties and throw countries into disarray. The Conservative Party will be over in a fortnight. And as for the Liberal Democrats, their party was over a year ago. You have to use a magnifying glass to find their 8 MPs in the chamber in the House of Commons, and if you're lucky, you might stumble upon Tim Forlorn Fallon or a Dolores Nick Clegg, devoid of purpose and prospect. Nick Clegg was a contemporary of mine here at Cambridge. And many years later, I said, Nick, I didn't know you. Nobody knew you at Cambridge. Where were you? And he said, I was lying low. And I muttered to myself, I wish you'd carried on lying low throughout. And as for the Lib Dems in the House of Lords, there are still over 100 of them. The House of Lords needs to be reduced in size. We know where to start. So the Conservatives will be history. The Lib Dems are already history, and now for the Labour Party. In fact, just this week, Mick Hucknall, the lead singer of Simply Red, big Labour supporter, just the clue in the name, Simply Red. He said, and I quote, what a shabby, spineless coward Jeremy Corbyn is proving to be. Either fully commit to Labour, in or Labour, leave or go. In fact, it's the first time I think I agreed with this chap, this Ron Weasley lookalike, but bafflingly successful 90s Lothario. Labour's decline has not been particularly sudden. It's been on the cards for a long time. We've heard from other speakers of the labor movement and its workers organizing themselves and the values. The movement was a much-needed antidote to the appalling underrepresentation of the working class in politics. The trade union membership now, it's just declined and declined and declined. Those who would have been at the forefront of union organizations a few years ago are now baristas and personal trainers. The Labour Party no longer represents its core constituents, as has not evolved quickly enough to the environment around it. This resigns the party to the same fate as the dodo. We've had great speeches. Toby Young, the collapse of the working class support. He spoke of that. And he spoke about Corbyn and his support for very strange causes, dangerous causes. Corbynistas and Blairites. He spoke about purity and willing elections. And he even spoke about Maslow's theory of self-actualization. Well, this is the speech. And then he made the important point. The Labour Party has a 12.5% chance of winning an election. And there have only been 3 Labour prime ministers who won an outright majority in the last 116 years. Charlotte, of course, as president, was immediately declared herself as a champagne socialist. And then she spoke about a pair of twits. And she then spoke about defending an undefendable position. And she spoke about Comrade Corbyn and saying he's not as pure as people think he is. I think you made a great speech and a great argument, and we cannot criticize you. You are the retiring president. And as for Zach, he made the best quote of the debate so far. A rat race is for rats. Profound. Sadiq Khan, he even said, Sadiq Khan, Labour must not be more than just a protest party. That said it all. And then Ben, you said you didn't want to dwell too much on the past, and then you spoke about the past. You spoke about this century's 10 years of Labour government. You spoke about 13 years of the great double B, Blair and Brown. Of course, well, and the floor speeches were terrific, congratulating Charlotte, even from a former Liberal Democrat president. We had a history lesson. We even heard about Chilcot. And then we heard about welfare and planning and redistribution and values. But it's been so entertaining watching Jeremy Corbyn and his gang of miscreants flapping their wings aimlessly, and it might just be that this poor dodo is going to be put out of its misery because this party is refusing to learn from its mistakes. And when it's reborn from its ashes, I don't know what's going to happen. And I remember when I first came here to the UK as a student from India, the Labour Party was in doldrums. It was a mess. We had the longest suicide note in history, Michael Foot. We then had this now we've got Michael Foot followed by the mumbling meanderings emanating from the part geography teacher, part vegan, cafe owner, and the complete shambles that Jeremy Corbyn's in. It's just amazing how things have come completely full circle. An impassioned leftist rhetoric who's how on earth can we take a man who talks more passionately about cabbages than capitalism to lead the Labour Party to victory? Neil Kinnock, well, the boyo who lost. John Smith. Now, if John Smith had survived, Labour would be in government today. But that was an exception. And then Tony Blair. Well, Tony Blair, we've heard a lot about Tony Blair. Removal of Clause 4. He was very successful, and now we're going to hear Chilcot. So let's see what happens over there. So then, of course, Gordon Brown. I have seen at the Lord Mayor's banquet this great orator, Gordon Brown, and 750 people, and I could see people falling asleep in front of me. He was brilliant. So there you have it. That was the last Labour Prime Minister, and of course, we all remember the bigoted lady remark. So I don't want to dwell on the past anymore. I want to look at the tale of 2 brothers. The brothers Grimm, a grim choice, Ed or David. Now, Labour's predisposition for backstabbing saw Ed Miliband knife his brother and got the crown. Now, from a satirical point of view, Ed Miliband was gold dust. I mean, he was political comedy to what Muhammad Ali was to boxing, that great man, Muhammad Ali. And Ed Miliband led Labour Party to its worst defeat in 30 years. He was brilliant, known for his inability to eat a bacon sandwich, his 2 kitchens, taking after his mentor John Prescott with his 2 Jags. He looked a bit weird. I mean, he said, I look like Wallace from Wallace and Gromit. But the one thing he wasn't was a leader. And then, of course, let's not talk about George Osborne. We'll move on. And of course, then Ed had his wonderful Ed Stone. So, and he said, hell, yes, I'm tough. Well, he was tough. Well, we won't go there. So, Jeremy Corbyn's election prompted Alex Massey to write, it's all over. In fact, it was all over before it really began, before you knew it, and even many of the poor fish who voted for Jerry Corbyn knew it. The Labour Party no longer exists as a functional political organization. It's a shambles, a once great party reduced to competing rabbles of independent gangs scavenging for whatever meager comforts they can rescue from the rubble. So there you are. There you have it. The Labour Party has continually stamped out dissent. It's got the Stasi-like operations of Momentum, that great organization, and it's against absolutely everything. As Toby Young has said, it's lost the working class, lost its roots, lost its way. The party is deep in the wilderness, and Jeremy Corbyn is now the king of where the wild things are. So at present, the relationship within the Labour Party is so bad that I think Jeremy Corbyn's team, who are not known for their fiscal prowess, their inability to generate political capital from anything. I mean, look at this at the moment. The Conservative government, the mistakes they've made. U-turn after U-turn. Steve Jobs said, the sign of intelligence is the ability to change your mind. I remind the Prime Minister about this the whole time. Flip-flops over tax credits, police funding, PIP payments, child refugees, school academies. And what does the Labour Party do about it? Nothing. It's absolutely unbelievable. So I think Ed Balls looks competent in comparison with John McDonnell. After all, John McDonnell relies on his red book. So let's not go further there. And Andrew Roberts said, in the 115 years since it was founded as a political wing of the trade union movement at the Memorial Hall in Farringdon Street, by the way, near the Cobra Beer offices, a really important location. In February 1900, Labour has rendered the British people a few signal services, but the Labour Party's time as a useful force in British politics has now passed. So I'm going to conclude, my lords, as I would say in the chamber, by quoting this great poster boy of the Labour Party, Tristram Hunt. And of course, he had to quote Shakespeare. This is the 400th anniversary of the death of William Shakespeare. And Tristram Hunt, who's the Labour MP for Stoke-on-Trent Central, which doesn't make pottery anymore, spoke about Labour's identity crisis. And he started this whole paper by quoting Shakespeare. And if I may conclude with this. He quoted Shakespeare, and I'm adapting it slightly, so bear with me. This royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle, this party of majesty, this seat of Jezza, this other Eden, this demi-party, this fortress built by Jezza, for herself, against herself, with the hand of momentum. This happy breed of comrades, this little small-minded world, this precious Edstone set in the Red Sea, which serves in opposition forever, or as a piddly moat defensive to a house against the envy of much happier lands. This blessed allotment, this party, this Jezza's realm. Ladies and gentlemen, the Labour Party is finished. Please vote for this motion.
Thank you very much. That wonderfully theatrical end to the proposition this evening. So we now turn to the final speaker of tonight. It's Thomas Fairclough, who's studying for his Doctorate of Philosophy at Gornville in Keys, focusing on common law rights. Thomas.
No, it's not opening. Sorry. Madam President, thank you for that introduction and for the spiel over my thesis. It's nice that someone vaguely knows what I'm doing, even if I don't. Firstly, I'd like to thank the outgoing president for what's been a fantastic Easter term. I know everyone said it, and so I'll keep it short, but it's been a great term of events, speakers, and debates, and so I'd like to thank her and the entire team for that and for the speech she has made. I would also like to welcome the incoming president from Michaelmas 2016. I have no doubt that Michaelmas will be a great term for the union, and I very much look forward to it. I promised to keep this speech relatively short for two reasons. One, I only got told I was making it this morning, and therefore have not had much time to write it, so shorter is better for me. And B, we've gone on a little bit. It's the last debate of term. Most of you have had exams, and I imagine most of you just want to go to the bar and drink your weight in alcohol at this stage. And I'm fully with you on that. So firstly, I want to talk about three things, Madam President. Firstly, the context of the Labour Party and political up and downs, frankly, the legitimacy of the Labour Party. And thirdly, I want to talk about the importance of an effective opposition. So firstly, the context of the Labour Party. Arguments have focused on the Labour Party over the last year since Jeremy Corbyn became leader, maybe the last 6 years since Ed Miliband became leader. We kind of skated over the Blair years and had a little bit of a look at the 80s, but really it's focused, and this debate I think is motivated by the rise of Jeremy Corbyn and the ineffectiveness of Ed Miliband. We're looking then at about 6 years in time. This is 6 years in the history of a party founded in February 1900, so just over 116 years ago. I think that it's pretty simple to say to the union that we cannot really properly, adequately, or sensibly suggest that the Labour Party is over from what is, on any measure, a short amount of time. This is a party, as pointed out, with only a few leaders, only a few governments, that introduced various measures that have been gone through, but I'll repeat them again because they're on my speech. The national minimum wage, they helped secure peace in Northern Ireland. They introduced the Human Rights Act. They scrapped the atrocious Section 28 that David Cameron supported. They introduced civil partnerships. They banned fox hunting. They set up the NHS. They abolished the death penalty. They legalised abortion. They decriminalised homosexuality. They helped dismantle the British Empire when the Conservatives at the time were fully in favour of it. And further back, they were building council houses before anyone was talking about a housing shortage. This is a party, in short, with a long history and a very successful history. And I think it's that you have to look at. You have to look at this debate and look at whether or not the Labour Party is over in the context of its history. This isn't to say the Labour Party is perfect. I'd be the first to say that Jeremy Corbyn has not been the ideal leader, to say the least. It's not even to say that you should vote Labour if we had a general election tomorrow. All I want to do is ask you to see the Labour Party in context. Look at its history, successes, and failures. Don't judge whether it's over on the context of whether you like Jeremy Corbyn or not. We had that debate, as I recall, in Michaelmas 2015. We also, no doubt, will have a debate on whether you will vote Labour in the next general election, which seems a long time away. But on whether, on examination, in the long term, you think the Labour Party's role in British politics is over and whether it ought to go home. Yes.
You and Charlotte and Ben have all argued that it's desirable for the Labour Party to continue, and you've also talked about the undesirability of the alternative, permanent Tory rule, though that wouldn't in fact be the alternative. But it's not about the desirability of Labour or whether Labour is going to survive. It's about the probability. You implied that it was the onus was asked to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and we hadn't proved that. I don't think it is. It's a question of what's more probable, the Labour Party's survival or the Labour Party's collapse. And I think we haven't heard from any of you how the Labour Party is going to reassemble its historic coalition between middle-class intellectuals, working-class, industrial, trade unionists. How's it going to do? How is it going to survive? That's what we want to hear from you. None of you have told us any strategy yet for how it's going to resurrect itself.
Well, firstly, on the point of how it needs to reassemble this coalition, it's you that have set the terms of the debate in terms of a coalition, not us. And therefore, I'm not entirely certain it's on us to act within the terms of that debate. Secondly, I'm about to talk about the legitimacy of the Labour Party and how the Labour Party is currently doing, and as said by a floor speech, thriving in certain parts of the country. So the idea that it's over, the idea that it's declining, just isn't borne out in the facts. So, which I'll come to. So as I was saying, this isn't about the Labour Party at the moment. It's not about Jeremy Corbyn. It's about whether or not you think it's over, it's done, it's dead and buried. We talk about a dark period here. We talk about a blip. I'm not making a comment on whether or not Jeremy Corbyn is the sort of, socialist messiah or whether or not whether he's, sort of Satan incarnate for the Labour Party and the left. All I want to make the point is that this is completely normal in British politics for parties to have ups and downs. Look at how the Tories did in 1997 and in subsequent elections in the 2000s. We were told Labour is now the party of the United Kingdom, that Labour now dominate the centre. The Tories are too far right, they're the nasty party. They had 5 leaders in 8 years, and they were tearing themselves apart, which, not much has changed, actually. We were told this, and then they won an election in 2015. So the idea that you can have a low point and you say, well, that's a low point, you're out, it's over, doesn't really bear out of how we view history. I think that's a sad view of how we examine political discourse in this country. So my second argument is legitimacy of the Labour Party. I think it's slightly arrogant to say the Labour Party is over because they didn't win a couple of elections. And I want to just, I apologise for throwing statistics at people. The Labour Party has 230 seats in the House of Commons. That's not a majority. Clearly that's not a majority. I imagine most people on this side of the House would want it to be a majority. But it certainly isn't over, it certainly isn't dead, it's certainly not declining at such a pace you can nail the coffin now. They have a quarter of the seats in the Lords, 20 MEPs, nearly half the Welsh Assembly and are governing in the Welsh Assembly, and the London Assembly. They have the majority of directly elected mayors, including the man with the highest direct mandate in the UK, the Labour Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. Added to this, this electoral success, which is electoral success, although not obviously outright successful in the House of Commons, you have a membership of nearly 400,000, which is increasing daily, which compares to around, 150,000 declining Tory party members? Declining because they're all so old, they're effectively dying off slowly. They are the dodos here, no one else. Making, this is the Labour Party as it is, the largest political party in the United Kingdom, and growing. We had 9 million people vote Labour in May. Now, that may not be 11 million that wins an election, but the idea that 9 million people have supported a party that's dead is frankly insulting and ludicrous. The motion for the debate is this House believes the Labour Party is over. Can you really, honestly, when you're walking through the lobby, say the Labour Party is over? Yes?
Okay, so all of your team have kind of talked about how the Labour Party is growing in numbers, but the real question is, who are the people that are actually joining the Labour Party? Because Ed Miliband has created this new system where you can kind of pay like a couple of quid and you can join, right? So they're basically like Tories who shouldn't be joining, UKIPers who shouldn't be joining, communists who aren't going to win the Labour Party in an election, comedians' cats. Basically, in other words, anyone but people who could actually be helping the party to find a new direction and to win.
On the basis that Ed Miliband changed the rules so you could pay a couple of quid and join, you can always pay a couple of quid to join a political party. It's a bit more for the Conservative Party. He changed it so you could vote. I'm not talking about how many people voted in the Labour leadership election. I'm talking about how many people have joined. People that have joined are vetted more highly than the people that could vote, which was a novel system at the time. So I don't think that actually works. So yeah, no, I don't think it is a case that everyone who's joined the Labour Party since May 2015 is either a Trotskyite or is a UKIPper. That's just not borne out in the facts. So yeah, we then move on to the idea of the importance of an effective opposition. There seems to be this idea, which I think is quite sad in British politics, that if you don't win a general election, you are a loser, which in Ed Miliband's case may or may not be true. But also, it's this idea that if you don't win, if you don't have a working majority in the House of Commons, you are somehow over, you are dead and buried, you are finished, you are useless. That's just not necessarily true. This is very, very important, but we have to look at the general importance of the opposition, the importance of checks and balances in this country, and we have to look at the alternative to the Labour Party as the opposition. We have a political system where, with a simple majority, the House of Commons can do what it likes. I don't want to insult the House of Lords, but the House of Commons effectively rules the roost. The reason we have an official opposition, the reason we have extra funding for them, the reason they have extra resources and they have official recognition is because someone or somebody has to stand up to the government and, has to stand up to the government and has to stand up to the government of the day, look at what they're doing and the alternatives. The Labour Party have been consistently good in helping to force U-turns and unravel George Osborne's budgets throughout their years in opposition. It's out of time, sorry. Now, you may say we don't need this strong opposition. You may say that's not necessary, but think about a world where it's just David Cameron making, quite frankly, a pig's ear of policy making for his entire career. Or worse, Boris Johnson and President Trump in charge of the world with no real controls of Boris Johnson here. If you lose in an opposition, you lose a proper democratic debate. If the Labour Party is over, what's the alternative? The Liberal Democrats with their 8 MPs, which just seems useless. The SNP, who, whilst they have 50 or so MPs, are never going to gain south of the border, since that's inherently not what they want. Outside of that, UKIP with 1 MP, the Greens with 1 MP, a party that's pretty ineffective and little hope for real political power. If you think the Labour Party is over, then you have to have something to take their place, and it just seems to me there isn't anything to take their place, and therefore they're not over. Madam President, I beg that the House oppose this motion.
Thank you very much. And that concludes tonight's debate, and indeed this term as a whole. I just want to flag up a few more events that we do have going on this coming May week. So tomorrow evening at 8 p.m, we have the Women in Leadership Forum. On Sunday at 2 p.m, we have Eddie Izzard. Remember to buy your tickets online for that event. And then next week on Wednesday at 3 p.m, we have I Weiwei. So there are lots of things that you can still get involved with, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your May week plans that you have ahead of you. So the motion before you tonight is this House believes the Labour Party is over and it's time to go home. The House will now divide. If you're voting in favour of the motion, please exit through the right door. If you're voting against the motion, please exit through the left door, and abstentions down the middle. Results will be announced in the bar shortly after the debate. Have a wonderful summer holiday, and we'll see many of you, I hope, in Michaelmas later this year. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.